H4. Now we're all here, said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods and his own hat hanging on the pegs. Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me. And for me, said Thorin. And raspberry jam and apple tart, said Bifur. And mince pies and cheese, said Bofur. And pork pie and salad, said Bombur. More cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind, called the other dwarves through the door. Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow, Gandalf called after him, as the hobbits stumped off to the pantries. And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles. Seems to know about as much about the inside of my larders as I do myself, thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. Confuscate and bother these dwarves, he said aloud. Why don't they come and lend a hand? Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Fili and Kili behind them, and before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlor and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarves ate and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. I suppose you all stay to supper, he said in his politest, unpressing tones. Of course, said Thorin. And after. We shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now to clear up. Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped up to their feet and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on top, with one hand, while the hobbit ran after them almost squeaking with fright. Please be careful, please don't trouble, I can manage. But the dwarves only started to sing. Chip the glasses and crash the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on the fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl. Pound them with the thumping pole. And when you're finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates. And of course, they did none of these dreadful things. And everything was cleaned and put away as safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and round in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and whenever he told one to go, it went up the chimney or behind the clock, on the mantelpiece or under the table or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop, he sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them about him already, and in the dim light, it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill. Now for some music, said Thorin. Bring out the instruments. Kili and Fili rushed for their bags and brought back the little fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bombur produced a drum from the hall. Bifur and Bofer went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine on the porch." "Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with viols as big as themselves and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp. And when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the water and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on until the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly the first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this was like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, and hollow halls beyond the fells. For ancient king and elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought and light they caught, to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung, the flowering stars on crowns they hung, the dragon fire in twisted wire, and DS is asleep. They meshed the light of moon and sun, far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to claim our long-forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man dwells. They lay there long, many a song were sung by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flamed, it spread. The trees were torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragon's ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the wound. The dwarves, they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their halls to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things, made by hands and by cunning and by magic, moving through him. A fierce and a jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, to explore the caves, and to wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly in the wood beyond the water a flame leapt up, probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons and settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered. And very quickly he was playing Mr. Baggins of Bag End Underhill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to and go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until all the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found that music and singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" asked Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said all the dwarves. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo. He sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf.